In this video, we're going to show you to install ignition coil boots on your Nissan Quest, located on both sides of the engine. With the hood open, we want to go ahead and loosen and remove this 10mm bolt, as well as the one on the other side. Grab this here, gently pull that up and out, and set it aside. Let's go ahead and disconnect our ground terminal. Using a 10mm socket, loosen that nut, wiggle the terminal, and slide it off. Use your 10mm socket, loosen the nut, give that a twist, and pull that off. On the upper brace here, we have a bracket that comes over and holds the computer right here. We're going to loosen and remove this 10mm bolt. Right behind the bracket, there's a J stud here with a 10mm nut. On the other side, we also have a J nut here. Once you loosen that, you can twist that and pull it up. So there is the J that we talk about that actually hooks into the body itself to lock that in place. I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and throw the nut back on the stud over here. Already installed the 10mm bolt right here. Now we can grab our battery, pull it up and out. Let's go ahead and remove our engine cover here. There are 4 10mm bolts holding this in place, and we're going to do this so we can access our ignition coils. Now on the 4th bolt down here, we're going to use a box wrench. So we're able to remove the 2 on the back portion, set those aside. And lift up and remove that cover and set it aside. Now we want to go ahead and remove our air filter box. So there's 2 things we need to take care of here. One is we need to disconnect this connector right here. This is the mass airflow, and there's a little tab on the top. We're going to reach back there, push down on that little tab on the top of it, and pull the connector off towards the firewall. Now that we have that harness disconnected, we're going to follow it over to the right side of the box, and down in the back we're going to find a 10mm bolt that is securing the bottom half of this box. We're going to use some extensions, a 10mm and a swivel. And once we have that loose, use a magnet, nice and easy. Pull that bolt out, set it aside. Our air box is attached to our throttle body via this rubber intake boot. Now there's a hose clamp right here that attaches the boot to the throttle body. It's an 8mm bolt head on the clamp, or you can use a flathead screwdriver. You want to loosen this. Now if we follow this intake tube over, it comes over to this black box, and there is a hose right here. We're going to use a pair of pliers and pop this hose off. Also on the base of our intake box here is this little vent tube. And on the back side, there's going to be a couple little tabs to release this clamp. And you can normally do it with your finger, but if not, you can use a small pick and reach around the back side and push down on those little tabs. There it is. So there's just a little tab on each side that you're going to pinch in and release that. So now we can lift out our air box. Now unsnap this here, and normally they come out in two separate pieces. You're going to lift up. Now we're going to lift up on the bottom, separating the metal or the plastic post out of the rubber grommet. The reason why we do this here is that the sensor on the back of the upper box here sometimes hits the upper cowl and causes a situation trying to remove that. With the bottom out, it makes it a lot easier to wiggle this off. Pull the intake tube off of the throttle body and remove this. On the top side of our plenum here, we're going to remove the 10mm bolt here, here, and here. Now when I'm removing something like this here, I like to throw the bolt back in, just a couple threads. It saves you from having to look for hardware later on. Now right here is a vacuum hose. We want to go ahead and remove that. So I like to use hose pliers if you can. Gently go grab a hold of that and twist it if you can. You know, if the hose is stuck here, you can use a little pocket screwdriver and get in there. Try not to damage that hose, but you want to break that free. You work your way around the edge of it there, just breaking that seal a little bit, and then just gently tug and work that off like that. Now we have these hard lines right here, the thin hard lines, and these are anchored via 10mm bolts. There's one right down inside here between these two vacuum lines here, and then over to the right, there's another one right here. So we're going to use our 10mm socket and extension, and we're actually using a wobbly, they call it a wobbly extension. It allows a little bit of that socket to swivel a little bit. Okay, remove that bolt. Let's go ahead and get the one beside it. Now if we follow these hard lines up, there's one that branches off and comes up. There's another 10mm bolt right here. Let's go ahead and get that one out as well. Now this hard line is attached to a vacuum hose up in the back. We would need to disconnect that. And I'm just going to use my little pocket screwdriver just to try and get around this here and break that seal free. You can try your hose pliers as well. There it is. And this will allow you some flexibility to go ahead and pull this away from that upper plenum. Now our goal here is to actually remove the upper plenum, so I want to pay attention to this. If we follow this around to the left-hand side, we have the vacuum hose coming around, goes into this retainer clip. Simply just pop that out with your hand. And then you can see that the vacuum hose is also attached right here. So we're going to use our pocket screwdriver just like we did on the other side. And just gently kind of work in there. Now as you're removing these rubber lines, you want to inspect them. Make sure that they're not dry rotted or split. If they are leaking from a split somewhere, you're going to run into a drivability issue. You want to go ahead and replace those as needed. Pop that off. On the driver's side rear of our intake plenum, we have our throttle body right here. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this, but we're going to show you the easiest way. First one is you can disconnect the two coolant hoses on the bottom. Then you can disconnect the electrical connectors over here and pull all of that off, and then pull off the throttle body with the intake. We found by removing the 4 Allen head bolts here on the throttle body and just removing the whole throttle body with everything attached to it is going to be easier. Now we're going to use our number 5 Allen key on our ratchet. You don't have to use a ratchet, you can just use a regular Allen wrench. You can see we have a swivel head ratchet on this. It does help with some of the clearance issues that can be presented. Now you can see I'm just breaking these free, and then we'll come on back and we'll remove them all. So we have them all broken free. I'm going to add a short extension to my Allen key here. That way there I have something to grip onto it, and go ahead and spin that out. There's one of the bolts. And that bracket's gonna just kind of pull off with that, like so. Let's go ahead and repeat for the other 3. Now all 4 of these bolts are the same length, so there's no concern as far as putting them back in and messing that up. You can see that the throttle body just loosened. Now on the passenger side of our intake plenum, we had just removed the vacuum hose off of this. Right behind it is another vacuum hose. And this goes around to the back of the intake plenum and comes back up and it connects right here. We're going to use a pair of pliers. I'm going to pinch that clamp, slide that down. And then we're going to use a pair of hose pliers, make it a little bit easier. What we want to do is grab that, and we're going to twist a little bit just to break it free. And once you feel that it's spinning, we're going to come back a little bit, twist that, and pull that off. There it is. On the back side of our intake here, on the very bottom, there's a silver bracket with a bolt going through it that anchors it to the intake. We need to remove that bolt. That bolt secures a hard line that goes to it. Pull that bolt out. We're going to remove this bolt here. It's a 10mm holding the hard line bracket. You know, this hard line runs underneath and goes and connects to another rubber line connecting to the back side of the intake plenum, right where the throttle body is bolted to. As far as the intake plenum here, let's go ahead and start to loosen and remove the bolts. We have one on each end, and then we have 2 and 2. I'm going to start in the middle here and loosen them from the center out. These outer ones are nuts, so be sure to capture those. I'm going to gently wiggle that intake plenum, loosening that seal. Go ahead and lift this up. We're pulling this up off of the 2 studs, and we're going to tilt this. This is going to give us some access to a vacuum hose on the back side of the plenum we need to access now. Now right here on the back side is the clamp. There's going to be 2 little tabs on the back. You're going to use your pliers. You're going to pinch the 2 tabs together and push that clamp down. And then we can slide the hose off. Now we're going to use our hose pliers to go ahead and grab that and twist that off. You want to be careful because it's a plastic tube and we don't want to crack that on the back. There we go. Now at this point here, it's going to be a safe bet to go ahead and take some towels and put them down inside the intake holes here. We don't want to have any debris fall down inside here while we're working on this. So go ahead and fill these here. Now on the back passenger side of the intake, if we pull this over, we have a hose right here. Has this clamp on. It's a little that silvery rusty clamp. I'm going to use a pair of pliers, and we want to go ahead and bring that clamp up just like we did on the throttle body area. Here we go. Get that hose pulled off. Now the next thing we need to get to is right on the back. We can see this hose right here, this fat hose that's wrapped, and it comes around to the back, and there's a bracket right in the back over here. There's a 10mm bolt on the right where my finger is pointing to, 10mm bolt that's on the other side. So we're gonna go back there with a 1/4-inch stubby ratchet, 10mm socket, and loosen and remove the bolt holding this AC line on the back of the intake. There it is. So we switch over to a longer 1/4-inch ratchet instead of the stubby. That gives us a little bit more leverage to go ahead and get that bolt broken and loose. So the bolt is loose enough where I can reach around the back here. Loosen that bolt. And there's the bolt right here. So go ahead and set that aside. Go ahead and work that intake plenum out and out of the way, and go ahead and set that aside. Now with the upper intake plenum off, we have access to our 3 ignition coils in the back, 1, 2, 3, and these all have 10mm bolts holding them in place. Now you want to go ahead and press down on the tab on the electrical connector. They all have them. There's one right here and one right here. So we're going to work on our far end. Press down and use the other hand and just slide that connector off. It's pretty easy. Use a 10mm socket. Go ahead, loosen that bolt. Remove it. We are going to be reusing that, so don't lose it. Grab that coil and we're going to gently twist and pull up at the same time, removing the whole unit altogether. Now that we have our ignition coil out, let's go ahead and separate the boot. Good. You want to pull that off. And on the inside here, you can see there's like a metal electrode, and inside is the coil spring inside the unit itself. Now, either one of these parts can go bad, but we're going to set this aside. I'm going to take our new boot. I'm going to take the spring and we're going to feed that down inside. Now, if you feed that down, it just stops. It comes to a stopping point. Now that we have everything installed there and we drop our electrode in, you want to make sure that electrode goes inside the coil. And push that up and on. And you're going to press it and you're going to feel interlock around the collar there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of dielectric grease and put it around the boot itself. Then we're going to press this back down inside the engine. Now we have a little bit of dielectric grease around our boot. Now if you're going to replace spark plugs, now's the time to do it. They're down inside each one of these ports. If you're just doing boots or coils, you now want to go ahead and put the coil down inside and secure it. Lower the coil down inside, press that down. Now I want to go ahead and install the bolt. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Once it bottoms out, you're pretty good to go. You now want to go ahead and repeat this process for the other two. Go ahead and grab that electrical connector, line that up, and squeeze that on. You're going to feel it and hear it snap into place. Our next step is to go ahead and clean our intake, our lower intake here. We want to clean the surface and make sure that there's no debris or anything on there that's going to hinder our sealing process from the upper plenum to the lower intake. I'm just using a spray solvent on a rag here or a towel. Now I want to go ahead and inspect the lower portion of our plenum and make sure that the gaskets are in good shape there. It is always recommended to replace those at the time of doing this job, but it's not always necessary as the gaskets can be reused if they're in good condition. Now we have our upper plenum here, and around the perimeter we have a rubber O-ring seal. We're going to use our spray solvent and just wipe this down. Now what you're really looking for is you want to run your finger between the plastic and the rubber and see if the rubber is protruding beyond the surface of the plastic. If it is, then that's a good reusable seal. Check all of the ports. If the gasket is smashed down and it feels pretty smooth with the plastic, you really need to replace them. On our upper plenum here, you can see the bracket right here where that power steer line bolts to. So we have the vacuum hose right here. So we're going to feed this back and get these two components installed. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Now when doing this here, you have to pay attention to these lines, make sure nothing interferes with the gaskets on the plenum itself. We're going to twist this off to the side so we can go ahead and install the lines on the back of the plenum. We're going to reach around the back here. We're going to put our bolt. Put the bolt through the bracket on the hose. And we'll get that lined up onto the back of the intake. Once you have the bolt started, we'll go ahead and run that down with our ratchet. And we'll go ahead and snug that down. Now we need to go ahead and install this hose. I use my pliers to open up that clamp. And then work that hose back onto this. There it is. Hose is on and the clamp is secured. Now let's lift up on our intake. And we're going to remove our towels. Bring that intake over, line it up with those studs. Lower the intake down into place. Let's go ahead and install our hardware. It doesn't matter on the installation where the items get placed, only when we torque it down is going to make a difference. Definitely want to get these bolts started by hand. Now I am going to use a power tool to gently run them down, but I'm not going to tighten them. Let's install our hose on the back here. Good, slide that back onto that line. All right, now that we have the hose on, slide that back into place. Okay, that's all set. Now we're going to torque our upper plenum bolts and nuts to 8 foot-pounds, and there is a particular pattern. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, on the back portion here, we're going to move our throttle body over. We need to install this vacuum port. Now we're going to install a new hose clamp because ours was broken. It actually, one of the ears snapped off of it upon removal. So we had to replace ours. And that's something you always want to take into consideration, is inspect all clamps as well as the hoses. Now we're going to slip the hose on. We're going to secure our clamp on there. You do want to make sure that those hoses are good and tight. You don't want to have any vacuum leaks after you assemble everything. Now we can install our clamp or our bracket on the bottom side here for that hose. Gently snug that down. Go ahead and bring your throttle body up into place. Now on something like this here, you want to make sure that the back of your throttle body is clean, and ours is. Inspect the gasket on the upper plenum as well. We're going to do the same thing we did with this gasket as the one between the plenum and the lower intake. Is that rubber seal should stick out further than the hard plastic itself, and ours does, so we know it's reusable. If it is flush, you need to replace it, so do it at this time. When installing your throttle body bolts, it's something that's always recommended to start them by hand. And on this bottom right one, we have to go through this bracket here. And when tightening these down, we're going to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. And they just need to be snugged down. It may be roughly about 5, maybe 5 foot-pounds, if that. So we just want to make those snug. There's not a lot of pressure. All right, so right there is bottomed out, and just a little bit more. Crisscross up to the opposite corner. It is bottomed out, just a hair bit more. Over to the upper right is bottomed out, a hair bit more, and then repeat for the opposite corner. Bottomed out, just a tiny bit more. Now at this point here, we have our hard line here on the top. We're going to position this, get our bolt started. Now we're not going to tighten this one down yet because we have a couple other bolts we need to get in, so we'll keep that line loose. We do have a vacuum line on the top. We can go ahead and work this on. Okay, that vacuum line is on. We come down here. We're going to go ahead and install this vacuum port as well. Be sure to inspect all of those rubber hoses for any splits or anything like that. Now right down in front of this module right here is going to be a bracket. We'll get that bolt started here. Now this holds the components right here, but we also have 2 more bolts to put in for our hard lines. They run right across the front. Get that one started by hand and just follow it over to the left. It's roughly about 8 to 10 inches over onto the passenger side here of that. Once you have all these started, let's go ahead and snug them down. Once it bottoms out, you're good. It doesn't have to be tightened much more than that. Now we can tighten down this bracket. and go back up top and finish by tightening this one. Now across the front, we have these 3 modules here to install, and we have our bolts right here that we had placed in before we removed the upper plenum. So just remove the bolts, line everything up, install the bolts, and we'll snug those down. And repeat this right across the front. Going to install our vacuum hose here. Now there's a plastic retainer. Press that into that, and then run the hose over and slide that on. Install your airbox setup. I'm going to work the air intake tube onto the throttle body. Position the lower box so that the plastic studs fit into the rubber grommets. And push that down into place. Go ahead and get your air filter placed in. On the back side of the lower air box, we have 3 tabs, one on the far left, one in the middle, and one on the right, and that is where your upper box will insert into. Get those tabs installed into that. Bring the cover down, snap your clips over. You can install your vacuum hoses. And then down below, we have this little vacuum port or vent hose that has a little plastic retainer. Simply push that in, snap that on. I'm simply going to use a flathead screwdriver to go ahead and snug this upper clamp down from the air intake tube to the throttle body. When we removed it, we used a power tool, but it's just as easy to use a flathead screwdriver when doing this job. And there you go. Once that hose clamp is good and snug, you're all set with that. Install the mass airflow connector on the top of the airbox. Simply line that up, squeeze it on. You're going to hear and feel it lock in. Install the bolt for the air box in the back corner. So I'm just going to reach around here, put that through the mount, feed that through, and I'm going to go ahead and get that started by hand. Now that we have that started, we can go ahead and snug that down. Line up our upper engine cover. We'll go ahead and get the 2 upper bolts started. Let's move to the 2 down in the front. So I want to go ahead and tighten these all down. Get our other front bolt started. We'll go ahead and snug these. Do the same for the uppers. Go ahead and bring your battery up. Make sure the battery tray is clean of any debris. Lower that down into the tray. Go ahead and grab your bracket. Feed that underneath the strap. Go ahead and remove the bolt and the nut off of our stud over here. Go ahead and line that up. Install that bolt through the bracket into the computer bracket. I'm going to loosely start the nut on the battery stud on the back side. I'm going to drop our J-bolt down inside the chassis itself or into the body. Now what we want to do is gently snug down that stud here or the nut onto the J-bolt, and then we'll snug down the other side. Now all you want to do is make sure that the battery is good and secure. You can go ahead and give that battery a jiggle and make sure that is good. Now that we have our brace installed and both of the nuts are snug, you can go ahead and give the battery a good little tug, make sure that it's secured. Install the positive terminal on the battery. Go ahead and snug that down. Give that a good twist, make sure it's good and secure. Once your terminals are installed, go ahead and snug down the bracket. Install the ground terminal. Slide that down on the post. Using your 10mm socket, go ahead and snug that down. Once it bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. Make sure it's good and snug. Give that post a little wiggle. We're good and secure.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.